The views and opinions expressed by the hosts of Black Talk Radio News and any guest represents their views and their views only, and do not necessarily represent the views of the Black Talk Media Project or the Black Talk Radio Network. Hello and welcome to this broadcast of Black Talk Radio News. My name is Scotty Reed. I'm broadcasting from behind the enemy lines of USA Inc. As I said I would at the conclusion of the last episode, which was titled BTR News, the Willie Lynch letter, and the black attack on black identified Christians. And I said I was going to respond to your feedback and your comments, and as long as you keep it classy, keep it respectful, keep it codified, I definitely will share our listeners' and viewers' comments. So let's get to it. Now, on that podcast, I discussed why it is incorrect behavior to be discourteous, rude. I think most people can agree on that, and it does not unify black people on any issues on any level, that, and especially issues that's deemed important to the community, like violence. I don't care who is coming from, what uniform it got on, what colors it's repping, all of this violence. These are important issues that need to be solved. Gun violence, that is, in all the communities in the United States, but particularly we see disproportionate amount of deaths in cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, and others. But when we have one group of black people who are most often talk about unity, but then we see them mocking another group on a sensitive subject and area in their lives, and I'm talking about religion/spirituality. Some of this rhetoric rises to the level of hate speech and religious discrimination. I also found it puzzling that a group doing the mocking, those doing the mocking, swears by the contents of the Willie Lynch letter, in which the fictional Willie Lynch writes that if slave masters follow the psychological methods he lists, then slavers would control victims of slavery for 300 years. And this letter was allegedly written in the 1700s, but we're going to lay this issue to rest once and for all, hopefully, because on this episode I will share some of the feedback received on the Willie Lynch letter and do a follow-up episode on the feedback received on the Afro-Christophobia portions in a few days. So this one is strictly going to focus on the Willie Lynch letter. So let's get to some comments, but before we get to the comments critical or commenting on the Willie Lynch letter, I want to share some other comments that I received on the same video. Now, concerning the Willie Lynch letter and the black attack on identified Christians, we had Red, Black, and Green write in, Black nationalist, 100%, Garveyite, 100%, Christian, amen, and thank you for this video. You're welcome, Red, Black, and Green. Make sure you check out the next video after this one, where I'm gonna focus on the second part, if you will, of that podcast, the black attack on black identified Christians. I got a lot of information I want to share. I think you will find it powerful, as well as other black nationalists. And P. Wells says, thank you for your information and your informative and interesting videos. All right, P. Wells, a longtime supporter of the channel of Black Talk Radio Network.com, and yeah, shout out to you too, bro. Make sure, thanks for your support. Now let's hit these other comments. Really, I'm only going to share comments from one person, and some of it that they touch on I'll cover in more in depth in the next video, that's going to focus more on religion, slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, and all of that, and how it relates to black Christians. But again, we're focusing on Willie Lynch. But let's go ahead and go through her comments right quick. So Joy 31608, thank you for your comments. Thanks for watching the content. The content, she says, is highly accurate if you look at the disunity. The slave owner religion was the only religion enslaved people were allowed. So I'm going to tackle that second portion of your comment first. The next video, you want to check out the next video, where I am going to share some information on the quote unquote slave Bible, but we're going to say the religion portion of that last podcast for the next time. The content is highly accurate when you say you look at the disunity, but it's disunity all over the world, and particularly here in the United States. You have a group of white people, mainly white people, called anti-fascists, who say they are opposed to racism and have out there in the streets fighting to the death in some cases. Nazis, neo-Nazis, neo-Confederates, and anybody under the umbrella term white supremacists or white nationalists. And then on the other side, you got those people. So I don't see there being any unity in any groups. Let's talk about Hispanic gangs. Let's talk about black gangs. Let's talk about there's a number. You have your Chinese gangs in San Francisco. So there are gangs, in just about every subgroup or ethnic group within the United States, in a long history of gangsterism, with the Italians, with the Irish, even the Jews. And so I don't see anybody having 100% unity. And I don't think it's possible, based on the evidence, what the evidence say of not just today, but history and just human behavior. So I don't think it's possible in the first place. Joy also writes, although they call the Willie Lynch letter a forgery, in quotations, the tactics it recommends are coincidentally, in quotations, still used this day. The appropriate response is to stop using the tactics. So again, just cause the tactics are an accurate description of people's behavior today, people have been exhibiting the same behaviors over, I guess, a millennium, however long people been on this planet, in whatever form and whatever civilization or culture. So I agree with, let's stop using the tactics that's described in the Willie Lynch letter, the tactics of division. But as I pointed out in the last video, he doesn't mention religion as, let's divide these black folks or these Negroes. Again, that was a clue that the letter was fake, because he was calling people black, and they didn't use those terms, and the language was like it sounded more modern. And this is supposed to be written by a British man who has a plantation in the Caribbean islands, in Jamaica or what have you, if you are to believe the fable. Okay, so why is he, spelling color in his letter COLOR versus COLOUR the way that English people? So just little hints there, but again, I don't want to rehash the first video. But again, it does accurately describe behaviors that we would say is in the quote unquote black community. So, but I agree the appropriate response is to stop. And that's why I did, talked about the second portion after the Willie Lynch letter portion, showing it was a fabrication. It wasn't a historical document. Willie Lynch never lived. But the black attack on black identified Christians. In the Willie Lynch letter, it's talking about getting the young versus the old versus the young, male against female, female against male, light skin versus dark skin, we went over all of that. And so while it didn't mention religion, certainly we can add that as accurate commentary on how people are dividing themselves, not because they're practicing different religions, but how they are discourteous and rude and quite childish towards people who have a different set of spiritual beliefs. I mean, some of it again rises to the level of hate speech, and so that causes disharmony and disunity. If Willie Lynch was a real person, he would be saying how proud he is and pointing to, see, I told y'all this would work. Okay, So it's not real. And you, I think by the end of this podcast, with the evidence I'm going to share with you on the author of the Willie Lynch letter, the actual author, who is no longer with us, and according to his spiritual practice, they would say he's going on to be with the ancestors. He's an ancestor now. So then Joy laughs out loud. It does say forgery. Question: how do you create a forgery of something that doesn't exist? So we're going to move into some of the evidence, and we're going to answer that question. So that's a good question, because in the article that was saying that this is a fake letter, and that the professor who proved it was fake got a confession from the real author, and we're going to talk about him in just a minute. In fact, you're going to hear from him. But they do use the term or the word forgery. And so most people thinking, oh, forgery is just copying something that's real, that existed. Like, let's say the Mona Lisa, a piece of artwork that's worth a lot of money, quote unquote. And you had these people who make their own paintings or duplicate paintings and try to make them look real old and stuff like that. That's called a forgery. When you're talking about counterfeit money, where you're making something look exactly like the currency, $100 bills, $20 bills, $5 bills, but they're not real, but you're forging. Okay. But often words in the English language, at least, I don't know about any other language because I don't speak another language, but in the English language, there can be several definitions of the word, you know, and depending upon the context in which it is being used. And after looking it up, they was using the word forgery in the proper context, according to some of the definitions. Who else knew that there were 3 types of forgery? I'm not one of those. I did not know. I understood forgery as most people, I guess you would say the common people, understand forgery, like counterfeit money, all the things I described already. But here is a definition of forgery. Well, it's not really a definition, but it gives you some context for 4 basic types of forgery. The headline says, what are the 3 types of forgery? But forgery is the creation of falsified material or the altering of any writing. I'll say that again, it's the creation. So Willie Lynch letter is an original creation of falsified material, meaning that it has false attributions. They've attributed to someone who didn't exist. It's phony, it's fake. It's Fox News. No, let me continue. Or the altering of any writing with the purpose of defrauding or cheating. Now, this will also come up in the next video, which is going to focus on the Afro-Christophobia, about the slave Bible, defrauding, altering of any writing, because the slave Bible was quote unquote slave Bible was altered. But again, that'll be the next video. But there are 4 basic types of forgery: traced, simulation, freehand, and lifted. So if you want to look those up, but in the context of falsified material, it does fit as a description of the Willie Lynch letter. Going back to the article that we shared as a source on that last video, the Willie Lynch letter and the Black attack on Black identified Christians, it said the Willie Lynch speech is a document that briefly advises slave masters on how to control black people. Ampin said the speech is a myth, he said, through primary research, firsthand research, or going directly to a source for information. Ampin said he had been presented with a confession letter. The confession of the alleged forger of the Willie Lynch speech, novelist Dr. Kwabena Fahim Ashanti, was all Ampin needed to fully support the finding in his research. Professor Ampin explained the process he took in order to come out with the quote unquote truth in this book. When he mentioned anti-slavery activists and pro-slavery activists, he said none mentioned the Willie Lynch speech. So again, as we discussed on that last video, doing your research, if you was reading the history, the documents, the letters, the speeches from people like Frederick Douglass, contemporaries at the time period that you say this is in. This is in the 1700s, though, when this was allegedly read out to a crowd of slavers. But let's continue. In order to further convey his point, he brought out other findings. Then there had been no evidence of the speech until the 20th century, he said. So again, this was covered in the last broadcast, and will, I think, present you some irrefutable evidence in the form of the author himself, and then the fact that we're giving credit to a non-existent white man for something a black man wrote, which was basically a psychological exercise, really. And again, but you can learn from Willie Lynch's letter, like I stated, the observations about the behavior. So we know he was commenting on modern behavior. So what can we do to change that behavior? Like the Joyce said, we need to stop the tactics. Yes, we do. But let's also, for the historical record, quit teaching the future generations coming up that this is a real letter to try to explain how black people act, because that kind of suggests that we're not in control of our own thoughts, speech, and action. Okay. And Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, I asked her one time before she passed, are black people responsible for their behavior? And she said absolutely. So we can change these things. There's no puppet master, especially a white supremacist, that's making us do these things. But white supremacists and their friends, their non-white proxies, help them create the conditions that lead to a devolution, if you will, in a culture, in a community, and by setting up the conditions for failure. And preying upon the people. Again, don't want to make this about prison slavery, but prison slavery was never abolished according to the 13th Amendment. Okay, so let's now get into some irrefutable evidence. I said that this was a black man who wrote this, and we're giving credit to other people, and we shouldn't do that. So let's find out who this man is and hear from him. The author of the Willie Lynch letter is none other than Dr. Kwabena Fahim Ashanti. And he is, in this article, it described him as a novelist. And he does, I think, have some works of fiction. But I listened to Time for Awakening Radio. I found the podcast of them, announcing his death and giving him credit. And so we'll hear that, but they describe him also as a scholar, a university professor. So y'all hear from that. But this is the man who wrote Willie Lynch. There was no man named Willie Lynch, and Dr. Ashanti is actually going to speak on how he came up with that name. So shouldn't be any future confusion. If someone does tell you that the Willie Lynch letter is real, please point them to this video. Share this information with them.
You are listening to Black Reality Think Tank with host Dr. William Rogers on Time for an Awakening Media, part of the Black Talk Radio Network. For podcasting or live program scheduling, hit them up at timeforanawakening@gmail.com.
Hotep and greetings, my brothers and sisters. My name is William Rogers, and you are listening to the Black Reality Think Tank. I thank all of you for joining us here this evening. We have a very special tribute that we would like to do this evening. One of the great brothers of the African world has transitioned to the ancestral realm, and we want to pay tribute to him tonight, as well as just talk about that strong African leadership that is so necessary in our community today. So we thank you. We're here every Tuesday evening from 8 o'clock 8 o'clock Eastern Time to 10 o'clock p.m. We are also on other times of the week. We are on a Thursday program we call The Warrior's Way. We have another program on Saturday afternoon called Black Sister Talk with Sister LaWanda Chambers. And then there is a program at 6 with the Milwaukee Council of Elders. And they are discussing things that are relative to our community that the elders can involve themselves in. So we'll talk more about those later on at the top of the hour, but right now we want to get into this great discussion. Helping me this evening with a tribute is my dear friend and brother who has been with us here at the Black Reality Think Tank many times. His name is Dr. Bruce Bridges. And Dr. Bridges is here. He was the owner of one of the most fantastic bookstores that I have ever opened the doors and walked in. So let me do this. This is an interview that the owner of the bookstore was doing with Dr. Ashanti about his book and his work, which then will lead us into the next area of his work that we want to talk about. So, listen to this.
If I may, what made you write the manuscript for Willie Lynch? Yes.
I'm from Durham, North Carolina. Durham, North Carolina is the home of North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company and Palmerston Candace Bank, the biggest black insurance company in the world and the richest black banks in the world. That's my home. We took for granted college-educated people, black professors. We just took that for granted, and so we never ever consider ourselves super hardship like the rest of the United States with black people. But we thought we were just as good, if not better, than white people. But even though we had all of these things, we still want to progress. And when we watch the news and TV all across the country, we recognize that, hey, we need to do something too. So we did our part. But I had just graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 1974, and we would have study groups in the evening after I got out of work. I was teaching at North Carolina Central University. Okay. So we had maybe about 12 young brothers sitting on the faculty, and some community people come, and we talked and stuff. We didn't have black studies then. We didn't have a black bookstore, none of that. But from these discussions and things like that, we said, why don't we start a black bookstore? And somebody said, yeah, let's do that. We didn't, we just talked. So we thought that to do that, then the rest of the community would be conscious like we were.
Right.
So one night, I was in my kitchen, sitting there drinking some vodka and orange juice. I was about 32 years old, and I was home by myself. And I decided to write something about the role of white people in slavery. So I had read a book called The Black Jacobins. And in that book talks about how brutal slavery was in the South. I had read some books about slavery, but they were not brutal like that in the South. I mean, in Haiti. So, but anyway, I wrote this document outlining the brutality of slavery. And then it was 2 pages, front and back. And then the more I thought about it, I said, what am I going to call this thing? And the more I thought about it, I know one thing that did a lot of slavery was lynch people. So there's a town called Lynchburg, Virginia, about 60 miles from Durham.
Right.
And I thought about that. Now I was wondering, I said, I bet you that's with the Lynchburg, that's the name because there must have been a lot of black people there. So I said, And we used to have a sort of like a name like you have now for black people. And if it was a male, it was Willie. You might have a name we call male here, not some kind of name, but it was Willie. So I said Willie Lynch. Willie Lynch. And that's how the name Willie Lynch came to be.
Wow.
Then I put that on the letter, Xerox in the old army machine. And at 12 o'clock midnight, I put them in my car. I ran 500 copies. I just rode all over town, dropping them off in Washats, places like that, where people would pick them up. They wouldn't necessarily see who did it because it was like 12 o'clock at night.
Right.
So that's what I did. And I didn't tell anyone in my group house.
So that was Dr. Kwabena Fahim Ashante. He's no longer with us, as that was a memorial show and paying tribute to him and his work. And he just told you that Willie Lynch letter was his work. It was a promotional, I guess you would say, a promotional campaign, an advertisement campaign to, as he stated, that we're going to start a black bookstore. Then we got to have these people conscious and awake, woken up from the slumber that they in. That's where the term woke comes from. It just simply means to be conscious, not asleep. And in this term, in this context, we're talking intellectually. Don't be intellectually asleep. So he made up, he said, what, 4 pages, 2 sheets, front and back. So that's 4 pages. Now, these are some of the books that he has written. And so as you can see on Amazon, his books are still available, and some of them are not available. So let me say that. It's a couple that's out of print, like this one, Psychotechnology of Brainwashing, Crucifying Willie Lynch. So here is the author of the Willie Lynch letter, who isn't some white man, some slaver from the Caribbean islands, a British citizen who's come to the United States to teach white slavers over here how to use psychology and have their victims of slavery fighting each other and loving them. So again, that's the Psychotechnology of Brainwashing, Crucifying Willie Lynch, in paperback, but it's not available anymore. It's out of stock. So you will have to find this at a black bookstore. Maybe they might have some copies left, or maybe somebody might want to sell some used copies. But the Crucifying Willie Lynch, the follow-up, I guess, to the Willie Lynch letter, is no longer in print. But you know what is in print? There is somebody masquerading, perpetrating a fraud as Willie Lynch on Amazon. Willie Lynch is a fictitious character in the Willie Lynch letter that was, as you just heard, created by Dr. Ashanti as a promotional material for a bookstore. And so some of the books that Willie Lynch has up, the fictional Willie Lynch, we don't know who this person is, who they are. The Making of a Slave, Willie Lynch, $6.99 in paperback. Then you have another one, can't quite make that title out, the White Lynch letter, the Willie Lynch letter, and the Breaking of a Slave. Now I'm reminded that we got some other culture hustlers out there talking about butt breaking and what have you. So then you got a couple of books, Willie Lynch, this fake person on Amazon is selling. Let's see, we also have some of the other titles include the Willie Lynch letter and the Making of a Slave. So and that's $2.99 on Kindle edition. The Willie Lynch letter. So all these different covers for the same letter. And again, as you heard from the original author of the Willie Lynch letter, it's only at most 4 pages long. But so I don't know, some people bought some of these things, bought some of the books and the letters. And so let's hear from them. Let's hear from a couple of customers that bought one of the books from this, what I'm gonna call him a hustler, a person who is conning people into, giving up their money for this famous character in the black community that is thought to be real.
Alright, so I never cared to leave video reviews, but for this one, I felt it was my duty to do so. I purchased this book, The Willie Lynch Letter, and I just received it. Just, so excited to dive into this piece of history I've been hearing about. The Willie Lynch Letter for years. I've read snippets of it, so I wanted to read the whole thing. Now, whoever was responsible for selling this book thought it was okay to package it up, knowing that it's damaged. It's clear that it's damaged. It's not even a secret. It's pretty obvious. Yes, the R is missing. It's like it's been just sliced off the side. Look at the cover of the book, the picture, the words. Everything is on tilt. Let's flip the page. Let's see what we have here. Everything is off center. The pages are connected here. Look at that. You don't even get to a free page until page 9, and then when you flip, they're connected again. The words are just falling off the page, just sliding off, and they felt it was okay to package this up and send it to a person. Take their money, package it up, and send it this way. So if I wasn't holding this camera, I'd have to give this 2 thumbs down.
That's really tacky and trashy that some individual is using the mythical character Willie Lynch in the black community to make money off of unsuspecting customers. Now, any proceeds should go to the estate of Dr. Ashanti, but don't count on that. Not from this person who is engaged in such unethical economic activity. Now, I'm sure if Dr. Ashanti were alive and he saw this, he would not be happy about how his creation is being used to economically abuse and exploit black people. But thank you, Joyce, for the feedback and allowing me another opportunity to continue to discuss the content of the episode. BTR News, the Willie Lynch Letter, and the Black Attack on Black Identified Christians. We'll be doing another episode in this series soon, focusing on the Christianity aspect of it. But stay tuned for more information right now on how you can support the work of the North Carolina-based nonprofit new media organization, Black Talk Media Project, and our latest promo for our social media community, btrcommunity.com. Till next time, peace and blessings to all.
The words are just falling off the page, just sliding off, and they felt it was okay to package this up and send it to a person. Take their money, package it up, and send it this way. So if I wasn't holding this camera, I'd have to give this 2 thumbs down.
Hi, the Black Talk Media Project would like to invite you to become a member of the BTR Community subscription-based social media platform. BTR Community is a platform that was set up for the listening audience of Black Talk Radio Network, the #1 independent black radio network online. For just $24 per year, your subscription gives you access to an interactive space to share information with like-minded people with your privacy guaranteed. Your subscription will go a long way to help us maintain and improve our current media platforms. It will also help provide a budget so that we can begin the task of establishing localized media centers and radio stations across the United States. The best way to show your support and appreciation for what we do here at Black Talk Radio is to subscribe. Help us to help you be informed. Join btrcommunity.com today.